The sun sagged low over the Arizona territory, its dying light bleeding across the hard pan like embers scattered from some great celestial fire. Wind dragged long fingers of dust across the open stretch, carrying with it the bitter scent of sage and old iron. The land felt wide enough to swallow a soul whole, and for a moment Alara Ward wondered if that was exactly what it meant to do. Her arms hung above her, wrists looped in raw rope tied to the crooked limb of a dead mesquite. Hours of strain had numbed her hands, but the ache in her shoulders pulsed with every shallow breath. She no longer cried. The desert had stripped those tears from her long before the outlaws rode off, leaving her to the vultures and whatever cruel god ruled these empty places. She forced her eyes open against the harsh, setting sun. The world swam, shapes dissolving at the edges, but she clung to consciousness. Not for hope that had fled with the dust kicked up by Calderboone and his men. No, she held on because she refused to die with her story untold, her purpose unfinished. The journal they'd stolen wasn't just ink and paper. It was the last piece of her brother, the last thread tying her to a promise she still meant to keep, even if the desert claimed her bones by morning. A faint tremor rolled through the ground. Hoofbeats. Slow, measured, unhurried. Not the thunder of a gang returning for sport. One rider. Alone. Alara tensed, every muscle trembling with dread and anticipation. Her captors wouldn't return singly. Calder didn't believe in giving mercy one-on-one. That meant someone else. A traveler. Or another breed of trouble she couldn't yet name. Her dry tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth as she attempted to speak, but only a rasp came out. The rider crested the nearest rise, his silhouette sharp against the sun. A tall man in a battered trail coat, hat brim pulled low, the outline of a rifle slung across his back. His horse trotted steady, its hooves thudding softly like a heartbeat. He paused when he saw her, posture tightening almost imperceptibly. She couldn't read his face, but the air shifted, alert, tense, watchful. He nudged his horse forward and eased closer until she could make out more details. Dust clung to him like a second skin. His coat bore scars of hard seasons, frayed edges, and sun-bleached seams. A faint insignia stitched on his saddlebag caught the last flash of daylight, a military emblem faded to ghostly threads. His beard was trimmed but rough, his gaze sharp enough to slice through the distance between them. He dismounted with slow deliberation, boots crunching on brittle earth. The stranger kept one hand near the butt of his pistol as he approached, posture wary. She recognized that stance. Someone used to danger, someone who'd survived it more often than he'd invited it. He wasn't the kind to stumble naive into traps. Alara summoned what remained of her voice. "Don't come closer." The words scraped out in a whisper. Could be a setup. The man studied her for a heartbeat, assessing the rope, the bruising, the marks in the dirt where she'd struggled. His jaw tightened. "If it is," he said quietly, "it's a damn poor one." He scanned the horizon, every movement controlled, every shift of weight balanced between caution and readiness. Satisfied no ambush waited, he stepped beneath the twisted limb and examined the knot at her wrists. "How long you been up here?" he asked. "Long enough." He grunted softly. "Then let's get you down." She stiffened. "They'll come back. Maybe." His voice carried a calm grit, the kind that didn't bend easily. "But leaving you trussed up like game don't sit right with me." The stranger drew a knife from his belt, steel flashing in the amber light. Alara flinched despite herself. He paused, lowering the blade so she could see it clearly, as though offering proof of his intentions. "Name's Rowan," he said. "Rowan Cole. Not here to hurt you." She nodded weakly. The blade met the rope with a swift slice, and suddenly she fell, only for his arm to catch her before she hit the ground. Her knees buckled, legs trembling violently after hours of strain. Rowan guided her down gently, easing her weight against the trunk. Her arms throbbed as blood rushed back to them, a painful flood of sensation. She bit back a groan, leaning her head against the bark. He handed her a canteen. "Sip. Not too fast." The water tasted like life itself. She stopped after 2 swallows, gasping slightly. Rowan crouched beside her, studying her with the soldiers' eye, measuring her injuries, her strength, her will. "What happened here?" he asked. She swallowed hard, fighting the tremor in her voice. "Calder Boone. He and his men caught me outside Dry Creek. Took my horse. Took everything." Her fingers curled into fists. "They left me here after they didn't find what they wanted." Rowan's brow creased. "Boone's bad news. Been tracking him across 3 counties. You must have had something he figured worth stealing." "My brother's journal," she said, breath shaking with the memory. "They killed him for it. Thought I knew where the map inside led. I don't." She looked down at her raw wrists. "Least not exactly." Rowan leaned back slightly, absorbing that. Something flickered across his expression, recognition, or perhaps empathy buried beneath weathered layers. "You're lucky he didn't finish the job," he muttered. "No," she said softly. "I'm stubborn." He almost smiled. Almost, but the moment vanished as quickly as it formed. His eyes snapped to the distance, pupils narrowing. "We need to move." Ilara stiffened. "They're coming." "Not yet," Rowan answered, helping her to her feet. "But Boone never leaves loose ends. If he wants that journal, he'll circle back. And I don't plan on being here when he does." Her legs wobbled, but she forced them steady. Rowan lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness. When he swung into the saddle behind her, she felt the quiet certainty in him, the steadiness of someone who'd walked through more hells than he'd ever explain. They rode into the dying light, the desert wind whipping through the silence between them. Ilara stared ahead, muscles aching, heart pounding with fear, and something else, relief, fragile and unfamiliar. Rowan's voice reached her ear, low and resolute. "You're not done yet, and neither is Boone. But we'll deal with him." She didn't know why she trusted him. Maybe it was the steadiness in his hands. Maybe the truth in his eyes. Maybe the simple fact that he was the first soul in days not trying to break her. Night gathered on the horizon like a closing curtain as they disappeared into it, 2 strangers bound by danger, hunted by a man who would not forgive losing what he believed was his. The desert swallowed their trail, and behind them, the empty mesquite creaked in the last breath of sunlight, marking the place where death had waited and been denied for now. In the weeks that followed the sun-scorched exodus from Redwater Ridge, the frontier seemed to hold its breath, as though the land itself sensed the storm building beneath the quiet. Dust lay thick on every trail, cattle moved sluggishly across brittle plains, and the sky wore a strange, pale hue that made even seasoned riders uneasy. It was during this uneasy calm that 3 lives, each marked by old wounds and unfinished reckonings, found themselves drawn together by a single thread of fate. The first of them rode with a stiffness that came not from age, but from scars too deep to fade. Elias Cordero had once been the kind of man young cowhands admired from a distance, silent, steady, and carved from the rugged stone of the frontier. He had ridden for lawmen, ranchers, and sometimes for himself alone. But now, every time his gloved hand brushed the handle of his revolver, he felt the echo of a promise he had failed to keep. The memory of her, the woman who once waited beneath the cottonwoods, followed him like an unspoken accusation. He had left to build a future. He returned too late to save the one he had abandoned. Across the plains, miles from where Elias's horse kicked dust into the fading light, another figure moved with the fierce determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. Clara Finch had never been a stranger to hardship, yet even she could not have predicted how swiftly life could twist itself into something unrecognizable. One moment she had stood in the doorway of her modest cabin, her children clinging to her skirts, watching the horizon with hope. The next, she was thrust into a conflict not of her making, one that seized her home, shattered her plans, and left her wondering whether the world still held a shred of mercy for a mother fighting to keep her family whole. And then there was Rowan Pike, a man whose reputation rode ahead of him like wildfire. Once a ranch hand with more grit than sense, Rowan had drifted from town to town, never staying long enough to let his past catch up. But the past, as he had learned, was patient. It shadowed him like a hungry wolf, waiting for the moment he faltered. That moment came when he discovered the truth about the men who had burned his camp and stolen everything he owned. The same men Clara feared, the same men Elias hunted. Three paths, once separate, were now colliding with the inevitability of a river meeting stone. Their meeting came at dusk near an abandoned windmill whose broken blades creaked in the rising wind. Elias arrived first, scanning the empty plain with a practiced eye. Rowan emerged from the brush a few heartbeats later, dusted in grit and suspicion. Clara approached last, her children asleep in the wagon tucked behind a stand of mesquite trees. She stepped forward alone, shoulders squared, resolve hardening in her eyes. She did not have the luxury of fear. Elias recognized her immediately, though it had been years since he last saw her face. Time had marked her features with shadows of worry, yet something bright still flickered beneath. He opened his mouth to speak, but Clara's voice cut through the growing wind before he could. "You left," she said, the words steady but not unkind. "You left when I needed you, Elias. And now the same men who tore apart Rowan's camp are coming for the rest of us." Rowan's gaze flicked between them, understanding dawning with cold clarity. "So, we're all chasing the same wolves," he muttered. "Makes it easier or harder, depending on how you look at it." Elias forced himself to meet Clara's eyes. "I can't change the past," he said quietly, "but I can help you now." Clara studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Then we stand together, because standing alone isn't an option anymore." As the last light sank beneath the horizon, the windmill groaned once more, and the plain stretched out before them like a battlefield waiting for dawn. Rowan crouched near the wagon's wheel, tracing the dirt with the tip of his knife. "They'll ride in before sunrise," he said. "They move fast and they fight dirty, but they ain't expecting resistance." Elias tightened the strap across his chest. "Then we give them something to remember." Clara stepped closer, the fire in her voice rising with the wind. "This isn't just about revenge. It's about making sure my children see another morning." The men nodded, each absorbing the weight of her words. For the first time in years, Elias felt something stir in him, a purpose sharper than guilt, stronger than regret. Rowan, too, felt the shift. He had spent so long running from the past that the idea of facing it head-on felt almost liberating. Night settled thick around them, wrapping the plains in a shroud of quiet. The only sound was the creak of the windmill and the distant call of a lone coyote. Clara returned to her children, brushing dust from their hair, before pulling the blankets tighter around their small bodies. She touched their cheeks gently, as though imprinting the moment into her memory. She would protect them, whatever it took. Elias and Rowan kept watch from opposite ends of the clearing, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlit brush. They spoke little, yet the silence between them carried an understanding forged not through trust, but necessity. When dawn came, blood would be spilled, whether theirs or their enemies. But for now, in the fragile quiet before the storm, they stood together. And for the first time, the land seemed to exhale as though acknowledging the resolve of those who dared to confront the darkness. The coming battle would decide more than the fate of a single homestead. It would reveal who they truly were when cornered by the savage honesty of the frontier. And the frontier, as always, would show no mercy. Yet even as fear tightened its grip, hope smoldered quietly, promising salvation if courage endured until sunrise ahead. Dawn crept across the plains in thin streaks of rust and gold, the kind of dawn that offered no comfort, only clarity. The windmill stood motionless now, its broken blades catching the first light as if in silent warning. Elias watched the horizon with a stillness carved from years of regret, his fingers grazing the worn grip of his revolver. Rowan paced the edge of the mesquite stand, restless energy coiled tight beneath his steady exterior. And Clara, her children still bundled safely in the wagon's shadow, tightened the last strap on the rifle slung across her shoulder. None of them spoke. Words would not change what was coming. The first sound arrived like a tremor through the earth, hoofbeats slow and certain. Elias felt the hair rise at the back of his neck, the unmistakable rhythm of men who thought themselves untouchable. Rowan turned sharply, his jaw clenching as he recognized the cadence. "That's them," he muttered. "They're riding proud. Means they're confident or stupid." Clara didn't look away from the ridgeline. "They burned a home with my children inside. Confidence isn't something they deserve." Elias nodded once, steadying his breath. "Then we make them earn their fear." The riders appeared in a breaking wave of dust, 6 men, guns strapped across their chests, faces painted in the cold arrogance of those who had taken more than they'd ever been owed. At their head rode Boone's lieutenant, Marcus Tate, a man whose cruelty had become local folklore. A jagged scar ran down his cheek, twisting the corner of his mouth into a perpetual sneer. When his gaze locked onto the clearing, he raised a hand, slowing the group as though savoring the moment. "Well now," Marcus called, voice carrying easily across the still morning. "A welcoming party. Didn't figure you'd make this interesting." Rowan stepped forward before Elias could answer, his boots dragging a hard line into the dust. "You made it interesting the day you came after what wasn't yours." Marcus laughed, leaning casually against the saddle horn. "We just collect what folks owe. And since your little camp didn't have much, we figured this fine lady's property might balance the scales." His eyes slid to Clara, making her grip tighten on her rifle. Elias moved subtly to block her line of fire. "You want the journal," he said, "but you're too late. You'll never find what's inside without the person who wrote it." Marcus tilted his head. "Maybe, but killing you 3 will at least tie up our loose ends." Before the last word left his mouth, Elias fired. The shot cracked like a lightning strike, slicing through the morning air. Marcus jerked back, not falling, wounded, not dead. His men reacted instantly, raising rifles, shouting curses, the clearing exploding into chaos. Rowan sprinted toward the wagon, dropping to one knee as bullets tore into the dirt around him. Clara knelt beside a boulder, firing with practiced precision, each shot controlled and deliberate. Elias dove behind an overturned trough, heart pounding, counting the seconds between enemy shots. He fired again, grazing a rider's shoulder, sending the man spinning from his saddle. Rowan's return fire echoed sharply, and another outlaw crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. 2 down. Rowan shouted, "Keep their attention." Clara yelled back, ducking as a bullet hissed past her ear. She sprinted to a better vantage point, sliding behind the wagon. Her children whimpered softly, and she whispered, "Stay down. Mama's right here." Before rising again, rifle steady, a clean shot rang out, a 3rd outlaw toppled. But Marcus had regained his seat, rage burning through his pain. "Kill them all," he roared. His remaining men pressed forward. Elias rolled from his cover as a hail of bullets splintered the trough. He landed hard, dust coating his tongue, and fired upward, dropping another rider who had almost reached Clara's flank. Rowan saw the last of them circling wide, trying to get behind the wagon. "Not a damn chance," he growled and sprinted across the open clearing. The outlaw raised his pistol toward the wagon's canvas, toward Clara's children. Rowan tackled him before the trigger pulled. They hit the ground in a violent clatter of limbs and curses. The outlaw drew a knife, slashing wildly. Rowan blocked the second swing with his forearm. Pain sliced through him, hot and immediate, but he seized the man's wrist, twisting until the blade clattered away. One punch. Another. The outlaw went limp beneath him. Clara turned just in time to see Marcus leveling his revolver at Rowan's back. She didn't hesitate. Her rifle bucked, the shot bursting through the air with a visceral finality. Marcus fell backward off his horse, arms flailing, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Silence swept across the clearing, broken only by the ragged breaths of 3 survivors. Rowan stood slowly, wiping blood from his arm. "You saved my hide." Clara lowered her rifle. "You saved my children." Elias, chest heaving, approached Marcus's fallen form. The outlaw's breath rattled faintly, eyes narrowing with venom even as life drained from him. "You can't stop what's coming," he rasped. "Men like Boone, they don't die easy." Elias crouched beside him. "Boone's already dead," he said, voice flat and unwavering. "He just hasn't fallen yet." Marcus's final breath escaped in a thin whisper. His eyes dulled, The battle was done. Rowan kicked dirt over the embers of a burning patch of grass. We need move. More of them could be close. Clara nodded, glancing toward the wagon. Her children peeked out, eyes wide and fearful. She forced a reassuring smile, though her hands trembled from adrenaline. Pack what you can, she told them. We're leaving this place behind. Elias approached her before she climbed into the wagon. I can't take back the years I lost, he said quietly, but I can stand with you now if you'll have me. Clara studied him, searching for the truth buried beneath his scars. After a long moment, she nodded. Then stand beside us. Don't run from the past anymore. Rowan tightened the bandage on his arm and swung himself onto his horse. Where to now? Elias looked toward the horizon, where the sun was rising in a blaze of fire and promise. North, he said. There's a marshal in Clearwater who'll want no Boone's men were here. And after that, we find Boone himself. Clara climbed onto the wagon seat, reins firm in her hands. And we finish this. The three of them moved out together, rider, mother, and haunted gunslinger, shadows stretching long behind them as the new day claimed the sky. Ahead lay danger, reckoning, and a truth none of them could yet name. But they rode anyway, because some things in the West didn't break. They resisted. They endured. They fought back.